When did you first meet Ed? Chris Palames, Boston, Massachusetts.
You know, I've been trying to remember. There were two occasions early on when I had personal connections with Ed, and the two times that I remember, although I'm not absolutely positive about the chronology, was I began traveling from Massachusetts to California. It was a good place to get away from the New England winters, and I had been encouraged, having met Judy Heumann first. Judy Heumann, whose name is and career is so closely linked with Ed's, and she had encouraged me to visit Berkeley in California to see what was happening at the CIL and to meet Ed. And so we had two meetings, two encounters, and the first of those, as I remember, was very quiet, personal time. I think it was probably a hotel or a restaurant, but Ed was stretched out in that huge chair of his, in a semi-reclined position. There was a fireplace behind him, and we just hung out for a while. We were talking about our lives. We were talking certainly about the disability movement, but it was much more of a kind of a quiet and personal time. The next time I remember meeting Ed was I was back in Berkeley. Ed was the director of the Department of Rehabilitation in California, but he was visiting back at his mother Zona's home, the legendary greenhouse in Berkeley. And I went in to visit with him, and he was in his tank, as he called the iron lung. The lung was affectionately called the tank, and he was in a back room, wood paneled, as I remember, and it was just, you know, there were so many people moving through. I think he had a couple of personal assistants, and our conversation was constantly being interrupted with people coming in and Ed giving them some direction and explaining what needed to be done, and then they're moving off. Some of that had to do with his personal concerns and his own life. Some of it had to do with his work. And yet, in the midst of that, we kept up this flow of conversation. Of course, one of the very striking things when Ed was in the tank was that you were talking to him through the mirror suspended over the iron lung, and that was very typical arrangement for an iron lung, and you'll see a lot of photographs drawn from the polio epidemics which will show that view of you're actually speaking to a person in an inverted way where they are reflected out of the iron lung. It's actually my favorite picture of Ed. I would like to trace it down. I think it was a cover of the Rehabilitation Gazette, and it was taken of Ed through the mirror. But he had this particularly, as he developed his mustache later, he had this devilish look about him, this Mephistophelian look about him, and I mean, Ed's energy was remarkable because it played at so many different levels simultaneously. You know, there was kind of wit and humor and these, you know, that sparkle in his eyes and the grin, and then someone would come in and have a question for him, and Ed was immediately giving instruction. And for Ed, instruction had to be so detailed and so precise, because if his personal assistant got something wrong, you know, the smallest kind of detail of the way his brace would be arranged for the day, or the particular clothes, or something else that he needed in terms of skin care or something like that. If things weren't arranged just right, it could be a really miserable rest of the day for him. So there was precision, and there was wit, and there was this, you know, remarkable personal connection that Ed always carried, first with me, and then I saw him carry with so many other people. It was some years later I saw him speak in public for the first time in Boston.